5. To Villa, the appearance of Carell out of nothing was like a prayer answered. Having arrived he knew not where, he sat on the grass, pushing his previous fears out of his mind, and did nothing. He was scared. Aliens, he knew for sure, were playing with him. They wanted to get some fun. All right, they could show themselves first. He stood up and shouted, daring them to come out from hiding. Pausing for breath, he listened to the eerie silence. It made him nervous. He started to walk, muttering all the while to keep himself company. After 10 paces, he realized he had no idea where to walk to. The horizon was unvaried in all directions. He cursed the grass and sat down again. He cursed the aliens. He cursed Avon. And, running out of everything else to curse, he contemplated cursing Carell, at which moment she suddenly appeared 10 feet away from him. And as always, she didn't seem the slightest bit put out by the turn of events. "It would be too much to suppose that you have worked out a plan of campaign, wouldn't it?" she grinned. Delicately, she moved her hand through her hair, looked around, helped Villa to his feet, whilst announcing that it was time to start walking. "You know the way?" asked Villa quickly, trying to fall into step alongside her. "When we walked from Revenge to the building, the sun was to our left. When I went through that door, I felt a strong push forward, which means we have probably landed a distance behind the building relative to Revenge. Therefore, we have to walk back to the building, go round it, and then walk onto the ship. So we walk with the sun to our right, okay?" "Okay," said Villa, with genuine admiration. Then he stopped, started to argue, but then ran to catch up Carell, who refused to discuss anything whilst not on the move. "You said that building was about 6 miles long, and we can't even see it yet. And then it's another couple of miles to the ship." Just the thought of it made Villa exhausted. "And besides, we may not have been pushed forward. Maybe time passed without our knowing, and the sun has now crossed the sky. Or maybe it's a double sun, and the one we saw before has now set, and this is its binary partner," said Carell. "Yes, what?" Carell laughed, looked at Villa, but kept on at a brisk pace. "Of course, there could be a million reasons why this direction is wrong. The alternative is to sit and wait for something to happen. And something might not happen. Or what happens might not be very nice. So we go for a walk. The gravity is low and the planet is small, which means we cover the ground faster and the horizon is closer. So the building may not be that far away after all. All right?" She had spoken quickly, and it sounded convincing. Villa continued to look glum. He tried a different tack. "They can't just leave us here, can they? I mean, they brought us here. What's the point?" "They didn't bring us here, Villa. We came to steal their signum, and we know that no one else seems to have got away with the stuff. So don't be too hopeful." "I'm not. I'm used to adventures with Avon which turn out like this." Villa chattered on, making a strong effort to keep up with Carell, consoling himself all the while that at least he now had a chance to be with her on his own without Avon around, and without distractions. If only she wouldn't walk so fast. After 15 minutes, a form began to take shape on the horizon. After half an hour, it was clearly the building they had experienced before. After an hour, they reached it. The entrance looked the same as it had from what was, according to Carell, the opposite direction. Carell walked up the stone stairway to the first door. "You're not going through it again, are you?" asked Villa, horrified. "We can walk round." "I thought you didn't want to go the extra 6 miles. Besides, the only way back to where you started is to retrace your steps." Villa seemed unsure. Carell put a friendly arm around him. It changed his entire outlook on life. "Supposing this is the same planet as the ship was on before, but a different dimension?" "Suppose anything, Villa, but take it from me, the best chance we have is going back the way we came." And without further debate, Carell walked up to the door and went through. Alone, Villa took a quick look back, found the endless grass no less enticing than it had been as he walked over it, and followed Carell through. Villa had expected to land on grass, and he did. What he didn't expect was to find himself in a metal cage. Next door was another cage, occupied by Carell. There were other cages on either side. They were empty. There was no sign of Avon or revenge. Ahead was the building, looking as it had looked before. The sun, sky, and grass, which made up the rest of the environment, looked much the same. "How do you explain this one?" Villa shouted. "With extreme difficulty," came the relaxed reply. "Don't worry, Villa. It could have been worse. Supposing whoever put us here lived in swamps and marshlands." "Well?" "You'd have got wet feet." Villa, for once, was dreaming up a witty reply when a sound from near the building made him turn away from Carell's cage. A group of people, similar in stature and clothing to the stranger who had entered the Revenge, was making its way across the grass. The people came out of nowhere, talking in a curious language, half distinguishable, half not, pointing, jumping, and laughing at the cages. "Our captors," announced Carell. "Don't scowl at them, Villa. They might take offence." Villa tried his best not to show any emotions at all, and sat down. The leader of the group, wearing baggy green trousers and a short-sleeved shirt, touched a control at the door of the cage and let Villa out. "A good job you just did that," said Villa. "I was about to pick the lock." "Without your toolkit?" asked Carell without malice. "And where would you have gone?" she added, as she herself was let free. Villa ignored the question. "What are they going to do now?" The traditional approach is to take us to a dark and rather oppressive little room and keep us locked up for several days without food or water. Then they take us one by one for a spot of torture, demanding to know how we got here, what we wanted, how many of us there are. If tradition holds true, this should also be a time of national crisis for them, when they are at their most jumpy, in which case we shall immediately be accused of being enemy agents. They could, of course, decide to kill us at once, or maybe they'll tear you apart limb from limb and rape me, or if I'm lucky, sell me as a slave to the local warlord. Villa turned away. He decided he was going off this girl. Carell, however, was still smiling. She stood, hands on hips, talking gently whilst watching the aliens. As if on cue, the strangers began to push and prod their captives. But just as the pushing was about to get too intense for Villa's liking, more people arrived. These were older, men and women with short hair and more restrained clothes. At the first sight of them, the youngsters took fright, ran to the building, and dived as one through the door. "Rescue?" asked Carell. "Or a fate worse than death," suggested Villa. "Still, you're right about one thing. The kids were jumpy." The opening words of the leader of the new group seemed, in tone at least, reassuring. Since they were spoken in an alien tongue, it was only the tone that could be judged. A hand was held out in welcome by the apparent leader, a tall man, aged in Earth terms about 35, with quick blue eyes and strong arms. He spoke carefully and deliberately. His manner was friendly, but cautious. Carell had a distinct feeling that although not armed, he could pose a threat at any moment, if he so wished. Seeing his words were not understood, the man rapidly switched to Terran, which he spoke with a perfect, if somewhat archaic, accent. "I must apologize for the behavior of our young friends. They are used to playing with androids rather than real people. Allow me to escort you back to your ship. It is unfair on our children to stand talking in their area. And you must forgive our not recognizing your esteemed selves. We assumed, because of your problems with the museum, that you could not be of the Federation. Now I see by your language you are. Many come and try to steal a quick use of our secrets, and the glorious Federation has taught us eternal vigilance." "We shall have to make a report," announced Carell, putting an arm around Villa in the hope of distracting him from the conversation. "As we walk back, perhaps you'll explain what has been going on. I shall not report everything, of course. You can rely on my discretion. But it would be better to give me the full picture." "No death rays, no torture," said Villa. "You are most gracious, madame," said the man, ignoring the thief. Yet just as the explanation was about to commence, he suddenly stopped walking and held his hand to his heart. There was a brief look of anguish on his face. The attack, if that's what it was, passed rapidly. The man resumed at his previous pace as if nothing had happened. "You have a splendid imagination," he said. "You must be Villa." "My fame has spread far and wide," the thief replied pompously. "Everyone knows of Blake and his team. If the young people had known with whom they were playing, they would have shown more respect, I can assure you, although it might have shattered their illusions somewhat to find that the heroes of their storybooks could be captured so easily. And a good job it was that they let us out at that moment. There could have been trouble." Carell interrupted Villa. "I would rather hear from our hosts about this planet and its inhabitants," she said, "than a series of boasts from you about what you would or would not have done given the chance." Villa gave way to a sullen silence. In the distance, revenge could clearly be seen as it emerged above the horizon. As they got closer, it also became possible to make out areas of grassland that had been dug up, not only by the landing of the ship, but also by someone or something else. The marks, Villa was sure, had not been there before. "This planet you call Scat is known to us as Riteral in our language. It means the world of the golden gift. My name is Laval. My friends and I are from Earth. We are representatives of the Federation." Villa stopped dead in his tracks. Carell kept walking alongside the speaker, raising only one quizzical eyebrow in response to this revelation. 500 years ago, when the inhabitants of Earth started to colonize this part of the galaxy, they looked at this world and found it beautiful, but of little value. There were no minerals, not enough wild animals to kill for meat, not enough fish in the oceans to catch, and it was too far from the developing trade routes to be of use. But it appeared a very pleasant place to live. The grass grew easily in minimal rainfall. In many parts of the planet, the local stone made good building material, and the climate generally was very pleasing. So they put a basic research team down. A small population can be maintained here easily, and we have always been a small population. The research team's mission was to look into new methods of high-speed transmission of messages across the galaxy. The work was considered politically sensitive at the time, and so the group was isolated. The research teams were permitted to bring their families with them. It was supposed to be, at most, a 3-year project, and the place looked nice, so everyone agreed to the isolation. But after 2 years, our ancestors discovered an unexpected spin-off from their research. They found, as expected and as the theories predicted, that they were able to speed up the messages so they travelled faster than light. However, as the signals approached speeds that made transmission from system to system practical, the sort of thing you take for granted now, they found they were actually changing the very fabric of the galaxy itself. Only by tiny amounts, nothing more than a few electrons per second of message. But it was enough to divert several of the greatest minds of the original researchers onto a new problem. "And before the 3 years were up, they cracked it?" suggested Carell. "You are perceptive," Laval told her. "They found out the cause of the electron disintegration and a way through into what was hitherto little more than a dream. A new universe. A universe that turned out to be just one in a series of parallel existences. And not just one series, but thousands, millions. More than could be counted. Each reality slightly different from our own." "And we have been to one," said Carell. "The large building. Our museum acts as a control operating one of the gateways into another world. It is one that is reserved for our youngsters. It takes them into worlds that are safe." They certainly seem safe, said Villa. There's nothing but grass anywhere. Near the museum, yes. In fact, most of the entrances are real entrances to a real museum. We come here for picnics and debates. It's a very pleasing environment in which to learn about your past. And we are very concerned that everyone should know about our past. That isn't an attitude widely encouraged in the Federation, Carell pointed out. Laval ignored the comment and continued his tale as they approached Revenge. The discovery of alternative worlds leading to infinitely varied existences was deemed so important by our ancestors, the original colonizers, that certain decisions were taken, including one that said that Earth should not know about the discovery, at least for a little while. The idea was to keep quiet until the 3 years was up, whilst during the remaining months the implications of the discovery would be worked out. However, it was soon realized that our ancestors were not the only ones who had broken through the electron barriers, and that gave them a problem. But we are almost back at your ship. Let us find Avon and continue the story with him present. Then you can decide what you wish to do. As the group approached the ship, Avon, never content with waiting to be found, appeared at the main hatch. Villa announced the latest news with enthusiasm. Avon looked unmoved. "White holes," he said, as Villa concluded. "Well now, that is, to say the least, world-shattering." "Care Avon, your mind is all it is reputed to be." "This is Laval," explained Villa. "They've heard of our reputation, and Laval has been really helpful since we got dragged through that building. It's an event horizon." "If they've heard of your reputation," Avon replied, "I'm surprised they haven't locked you up by now." Suddenly he seemed to change tack. "It's time to go. Unless you prefer to stay here chatting with your newfound friends." "Avon!" Villa was upset. "These people are friendly. They can help us. They've already rescued us." "Very well," said Avon. He stepped back onto the ship's entry bay and then turned. "I should stand back if I were you. The blast from the ship can be considerable when it's lying flat." And with that, he disappeared into Revenge. Within a second, Carell was on board, dragging Villa with her. But Villa didn't like being forced. "Logically," said Carell, pushing him up the gangway and then along the stair shaft that led to the upper deck, "if there is a reason for getting out quickly, then it is not a good idea to discuss it in front of the enemy." Villa decided not to protest this obvious misuse of the word enemy. He'd had enough protesting. It was just the law of life. If he wanted to stay, they went. If he said leave, they stayed. If he wanted to be in Sector 8 at the edge of the galaxy, they went to Earth. This was Villa's law, he decided. In the control room, Avon rapidly started the ramjet firing sequence. "They are letting us go, Avon," Villa told him, despite all his resolutions on the way up. "Doesn't that indicate something?" "That is the most worrying thing," Avon replied. "Carell, get this ship ready for takeoff as fast as possible. But do not go up." "Conscience?" she asked. Avon looked puzzled. "You don't want to injure those people?" "It is just that we are not going up," he said. "Ease up 10 feet, and then head straight for that building, preferably for the door." "Avon!" "Villa, if you are so convinced of their friendliness, you can try and explain what 3 Federation pursuit ships are doing coming into land at this very moment, without the slightest problem from the sophisticated devices your friends used to try to scare us off in the first place." "I thought it funny when they welcomed us as Federation people, and then welcomed us just as much when they found out who we really were. I don't suppose you've had time to fix a plasma shield?" "No, I haven't, which is why we are not heading up into the air." "So where are we going?" "Straight through that doorway." "But it's not big enough to throw a whole ship through." "If it really is a white hole, then it will simply expand to accept us. We'll soon know. Without shielding, there is nowhere else to go. Get this straight, Villa. The whole planet is a trap, and we walked into it." As Avon spoke, Carell was bringing the ship to readiness for a run at the building. On the ground, the inhabitants of Scat were running left and right, trying to escape the massive downdraft that the ship made when taking off from a prone position. "Anyway, what is the point of being in an alternative universe?" asked Villa above the fusion howl. "Answer that yourself," Carell told him. "You are in it." Below, the world was bleak and windswept. There was no sign of the grassy landscape, nor even the building they had just rammed. Avon looked hard at the information coming from the panels surrounding him, then looked up. "Carell? It's just possible that the push through the gate gave us an unexpected leap far in excess of anything the ship's drive had on offer. Get us away from this planet and get a fix on the location." "Avon, Carell," pleaded Villa. "What is going on?" Carell locked the drive into position and looked at the controls. "Villa, it's like this. I haven't the faintest idea what has happened. I don't know where we are. I don't know when we are. I'm fairly uncertain if we are still in our own universe, and I can't even be sure that the normal laws of science apply out here. The universe has 11 dimensions. We could be locked at a tangent to any of them. Does that put your mind at rest?" "Oh yes, wonderful. So far, since we approached that planet, I've seen a living crumbling wall turn into a building which had a locked door that dragged me through it when it opened, been taken on a 20-mile hike, put in a cage and sent through a white hole. And now you tell me you don't know what is going on. If you want my advice—" "No," said two voices. "I'll tell you anyway," said Villa. "I was afraid of that," Avon replied caustically. "What we should be doing is setting ourselves up so we can live out our lives, or what is left of them, in peace and tranquility. You, Avon, should come clean and explain why you shot Blake, and what your next great scheme is, and if it involves the death of me. And when you've finished that lot, you can let me know why you were so sure that those people down there were Federation agents or whatever. As you pointed out in the past, there were many times when they could have shot us if they wanted, and they didn't. They let us through." Avon was silent for a moment, and then spoke quietly. "Villa, you were never very bright at the best of times, and this doesn't seem to be the best of times." Before Villa could come back with further demands, Carell gave a call. "We are 2,000 spatials from Scat, and according to the positions of all the stars, that is still Scat." "All right, let's take another look. Go back down, Carell." Villa objected. "Last time we went down, the ship was nearly blown to bits." "So, would you rather rush around this galaxy without even knowing if we can get back to our own time through the white hole?" Carell was less hopeful. It's unlikely the white hole still exists after driving the ship through it. "The building may have been destroyed," Avon told her, "but something must be left." Yet he was wrong. The descent to the planet was uneventful, and the new Scat nothing but barren rock. In vain they searched for any sign of the building. "In this galaxy, the building simply doesn't exist," said Carell. "The original colonizers never came." "It goes back further than that," Avon told her. "The weather conditions were never right to create the grasslands. This is a very different universe." Villa gave up. If this was another universe, he didn't fancy it, and was sure he could create a better version. He opened a locker to the side of his position and reached in for the container of parahyrene. He found only thin air. Turning, he saw Avon holding the small phial. Villa tried to grab it, but Avon pulled back. In his other hand, Avon was holding Cat. "When did you last use this?" "I haven't," said Villa. "Very well," Avon replied equitably. "But you tested it on Cat." "I gave Cat a drop to make sure it was the real stuff after the first run into Scat. I didn't fancy too many more of those." He made another grab for the container, and Avon let him take it. Without speaking, Villa left the flight deck for the solitude and alternative realities of his own room. In every respect, he had had enough. "Mysteries galore," said Carell after Villa had gone. "I presume at least you solved the Signum problem. You wouldn't have left the planet so rapidly otherwise, no matter what the threat." Avon acknowledged the deduction. The signum was there all the time in the grass, he told her. It was the grass, as Kat later confirmed. We expected to find it as crystals, because that is how we have always experienced it. But in its raw state it is quite different, and, by and large, harmless. To collect it, you need a lawnmower. Then you can make enough shielding to protect a fleet of ships. Or much more than that if you could drop through the white hole and find more scats packed with lawns of signum. And I presume you saw, as I felt, that on walking through the doorway one is lifted off the ground, as if it were important that you don't make contact with both sides of the door at once. Avon sat down and stared at the monitors. I took something that was from one side of the doorway, the grass, and sent it to the other side. The result was an explosion. So, he continued quickly, almost bored by having to restate the obvious, you have white holes from one time-space continuum into another, plus all the shielding you could ever need. And then you decide not to let anyone come near you. And that leaves the question, what are you afraid of? Lival told us that his ancestors found that they were not the first to get through the white holes. They therefore knew the story of Signum would get out, if not through this continuum, then through another. And the last thing their ancestors wanted was to draw attention to a beautiful planet by making it some kind of impenetrable fortress. So they just gave people a bumpy ride. Most give up, a few get through. Those who do get through can be dealt with by the gateway. Most will probably get hopelessly lost in other time-space zones. Villa and I had the good sense to jump back through the gateway in the opposite way to which we went in. You had the sense not to go in the first place. But even so, we have now ended up in another universe, which doesn't make us too great on the escapology ratings. But you do have a penchant for non-urban environments. I wonder why. Avon looked away from the monitors and glanced at Corell. He said nothing and returned to the screens, typing out new instructions on the touch controls. I know that withering look, Corell said. Are you going to tell me where I am wrong, or do I have to guess? Avon remained silent. All right, the woman said. I'll amuse you, Avon. I'll talk through the problems. First, they welcomed us as honoured guests of the Federation, and then as honoured rebels. So, who do they give their allegiance to? Second, their ancestors worked for the Federation, but tried to keep information from the administration on Earth. They know knowledge of white holes is widespread, but I've never heard a rumour that their locations are known. Some people in the Federation could know about the locations, but if they do, they probably use that knowledge for their own benefit. That would mean the ships you spotted were not here on official Federation business, but probably ruling scat through the threat that if the Federation proper ever gets in, life will be a lot worse. That would explain why ships are not shot down as they approach scat, because that could attract the attention of Federation officials who are not actually in on the secret. Corell paused and thought. Avon's silence indicated that she was not on the right track. She could acknowledge that she had no proof, but the explanation itself seemed logically sound, and without some evidence to disprove it, she couldn't accept Avon's attitude. She was either missing a clue or an essential piece of information. She sat down to think. Something deep in her brain told her it was to do with the ground, the earth, natural growing things, the trees on Gouda Prime, the grass on Scat. For 5 days the ship stayed in orbit around the barren rock that Scat had become. Avon moved from the control cabin into the ship's cargo bay and set up a workshop which would convert the grass signum into material that could be used as part of the new shielding. The cargo bay on Revenge was large, some 200 yards square, designed to carry the cargo that the freighter ship would have plied between planets. Set in the roof were 4 single lamps, which gave out strong but not glaring light, very much to Avon's liking. His suit got dirty again, but he didn't change. He cut back on the sleep, knowing that every moment the ship was without shielding was another moment of vulnerability. He also cut communication down to a minimum. At first, the floor of the hold seemed to Villa, who did much of the fetching and carrying, to be covered in dirt and grass. But as time went by, the amount of grass diminished, and the small containers that Avon had put on the metal shelving around the edge of the hold began to be filled with a fine white powder. Avon worked without machines, for there were none on board that would suit his purpose, and could be seen grinding the grass into pulp in trays with a makeshift pestle and mortar, before taking the containers carefully down to the drive room, where the fusion process engines continued at the lowest level, providing just enough power to keep the ship in its orbit. That power was also just enough to generate the heat that Avon needed to turn the paste into crystals. As the process developed, Villa began to find that apart from the occasional bit of clearing up and physical labour, he was required less and less in the hold. Having had one bout of parahyrene, he refrained from entering that other world again. He talked with Cat, but the talk got boring. Even the cocktails Cat suggested were beginning to pall a little. At length, with no other conversation around and no other tasks to perform, Villa began to talk to the main ship's computer. The machine answered always without any sign of personality, giving responses in a flat monotone. That was to be expected. No one would bother to give a freighter computer a personality. But it didn't stop Villa. "You're boring, you know that," Villa told the machine. The computer did not reply, as he knew it would not. It only gave specific information on specific requests. It did not even seek to explain itself. "Worse than Aurak," Villa concluded. As he explained to the machine, "Aurak had opinions, even if they were pompous. You have nothing. You don't even have a name." The machine remained silent, its lights showing only the standard red alert light. "I'll give you a name," Villa told it. The computer did not seem impressed. Villa leaned across and pressed the Learn contact. A second red light appeared. "From now on, you will respond to the name—" He paused. "What name? How do you go about naming a computer?" Villa tried hard to focus his mind, but no thought sharpened up. He took another sip of his drink. His mind wandered. He thought of Corell currently resting on her bed. He thought of Avon endlessly slaving away to get the ship prepared. But for what? His thought drifted uneasily through the 5 turbulent years since he had been found guilty and sentenced to deportation for life on Cygnus Alpha. He thought of all the people he had been with since then. Gan, Jenna, Callie, Tarrant, Dana, Sulin, and of course Blake. Blake, the great champion of the Freedom Party, dedicated to fighting the Federation's overwhelming power. Eventually, even the official vid news broadcasts recognized their existence, frequently reporting that one of the infamous so-called Blake 7 had been captured, or arrested, killed, maimed, destroyed, eaten alive, or whatever suited their propaganda purposes that day. Blake 7. And in 5 years, there had been 7 deaths. Now there was nothing but the memory of 7 dead friends. An idea came into Villa's head, followed by a smile. "Computer, my old friend," he said, ignoring for a moment the previous names he had called the machine. "I have a name for you. You will only respond to this name, and not to any other name in future, and that order cannot be countermanded. You have a name. Your name is Blake." And that, thought Villa, should cause a bit of anguish to pass through Avon's mind next time he had to ask the computer for help. Villa pondered his action and took another drink. He looked at the machine, at Blake, and pulled his thoughts together. One of Cat's better ideas for sifting out wine that tasted intoxicating but didn't impair judgment seemed to be working. Villa should have been half drunk, but felt only inspired by the alcohol. "Blake," he announced, "you need a personality. I can't give you Blake's personality, or else you would send us tearing around the galaxy trying to defeat the Federation all over again. And, he added realistically, because I don't know that much about programming. I'll give you the instructions verbally. You will obey the instructions I give you on how to behave on all, I repeat, all future occasions. No contrary instructions can be given. Villa was starting to enjoy this. He began to stroll up and down the empty flight deck. As he gave instructions, he gestured with his arms, his voice getting more lyrical, his language more flamboyant. Soon he began to feel a sense of real power, but his brain was clear enough to instill a sense of realism. If he went too far, Avon would find ways of bypassing the instructions, and all would be lost. Villa had to take the matter carefully, add a little day by day. He warmed to the idea. Avon wasted no time resting once he had finished the main work of preparing the signum. He banged on Corell's door, demanded her presence in the control room with him. He was covered in a mixture of grass and white powder. "You look terrible," Villa told him. "Still, I suppose you have the consolation of knowing that if anyone fires a plasma bolt at you, it'll bounce off." Avon ignored the remark and turned to Corell as she entered. "What have you found? Or have you been sleeping the past 5 days?" Corell was unruffled. Villa looked at her afresh. It seemed that whatever clothes she wore, they looked as if they were exactly the right choice for her. Today, she appeared in a velvet jacket and faded blue trousers. "I have a galaxy with some communication traffic, but not as much as there should be. A definite increase in communications towards the first sector. Earth." "Quite probably, Villa, although in this universe nothing is certain. There's virtually nothing around here. No sound of the normal Federation computer talk, very little sign of interstellar movement generally, and absolutely nothing on SCAT." "Good," announced Avon. "Take the ship down and land. Villa and I will need about 3 hours outside the ship to fix the shielding completely." "Not again," pleaded Villa. "Not down there. I know it was all clear last time, but I don't really want another buffeting. Can't you fix the thing in orbit?" Avon smiled and turned gently towards Villa, one hand raised, a finger pointing. He hesitated for a moment, and then spoke. "Villa, you're right." "Am I? If you say so, I must be wrong." "We shall fit the shield in space. Get a suit on." "A space suit? You could try an underwater diving suit, but I'm not sure it would work. I'm not putting that spacesuit on again, and that's final." Avon took on the attitude of a kindly uncle dealing with a rather unintelligent nephew. "Villa, if you go outside into space in orbit without a suit, you will not be able to breathe." "I know that. That's what I'm saying. I'm not going outside." "Fine. Sit down. Corell, take us down." "Computer," announced Corell, "give me a descent path through an open plane on the planet's surface." There was silence. Villa coughed. I gave the computer a name," he said diffidently. "It seemed a shame not to have a computer with a name." "What name?" Villa told him. Avon's face remained blank. It was impossible to read his thoughts. Corell just laughed and repeated the order. "It is on your screen, Corell," the computer replied. Avon and Corell looked up at the computer simultaneously. Villa tried to look the other way. "You can take over controls yourself, or you can return the ship to my control and leave yourself free for other tasks." And I gave it a bit of personality, just to make it more friendly. "Any other bits of the ship you've decided to play with in the last few days?" demanded Avon. "Navigational instruments only responding to the galaxy's known gambling dens? Monitors only showing the outside environment when they think it's pretty?" "Nothing especially," Villa announced. Corell came to his rescue. "Do you want this ship down, or do you want to have a row with Villa?" she asked Avon. "Put us down," came the terse reply. "Blake," said the pilot. I know, replied the computer.